This is Hannah and Cailin, back again with Double Talk.
I'm Hannah.
And I'm Cailin.
This spring, we got an up-close look into what would be Shelley Duvall's final film by director Scott Goldberg, who shared stories of Shelley's passion, intellect, and kindness while working on the Forest Hills. We had no idea at the time that in just a few weeks, we would have the once-in-a-lifetime honor of getting to experience Shelley's warmth ourselves in a long conversation and interview over the phone, realizing that what we'd heard from Scott and everyone else who has worked with Shelley was true. She was truly something special. There will never be another Shelley. Today, as part of our two-part celebration of the life and career of Shelley Duvall, we want to share with you a reflection of the last director who got to work with Shelley on a film, someone who got to see firsthand that even in her final years and months, she held on to a deep love for people and film. Here is our conversation with the Forest Hills director Scott Goldberg about how he and Shelley created Shelley's final role.
This is Shelley Duvall's big return to film after 2 decades out of the spotlight, which is amazing. What was the conversation like getting her on board for this? How did she come to be involved? And what was it about the project that you think drew her to it?
I think she's just wanted to return to acting. I mean, it was an opportunity for her, and and she was great to work with. I basically did my research online. I kind of tell the story a little bit, and I just try to keep privacy, obviously, because I know like people would want to contact her and stuff, but just kind of just do my research, due diligence as a producer, and trying to figure out how I can get in touch with her. And so I got in touch with someone that she knows, and then through there I was able to talk and discuss her potentially being in the film. So that's kind of how we got involved. She's really sweet, sharp, intelligent still. I mean, I know there's like past media portrayals, and stuff that she's done in the past, and whatnot, and didn't like paint her in a great light. But when we worked with her, she was very sweet, very nice, and sharp and funny. And the first 2 times, I think the first time she, when we filmed with her, it was only my producer, Scott Hansen, and Steve Wallenda, who was helping with some of the sound and some of the producing on that day. And they went to Texas and filmed with her, and it was literally, it was just her talking on camera. And that was originally what the idea was. And then from there, she said to them, I would love to actually act with someone on screen. So then we set up another shoot where she worked with Felissa Rose, who played Angela in Sleepaway Camp, in the original Sleepaway Camp from the 80s. And then from there, the characters kind of expanded and, just went on from there. And and she wanted to act more and more. And so we kept on filming with her until we felt that the character had a beginning, middle, and end.
It sounds like a very collaborative process. This is a very interesting role for her, especially after a big return after 2 decades. What was the discussions like for the character of Mama? Because obviously there's a lot of intense themes going on in the beginning, like familial things. Gets a little bit gory towards the middle. How did she bring her ideas into it? And then what were your ideas for the character?
Did she express to you what she wanted from this return to acting? Because I think it's interesting when you say, obviously people have tried to get in contact with her over the past 20 years, right? And clearly there's something about your production, you, and the story and the character that must have resonated her to bring her back.
Yeah, I mean, I was very persistent and I knew that I wanted to work with her, and I'm a big fan of The Shining, so there was always this wanting to work with her because I'm a big fan of her and her work. So when it came to the, production starting, the whole initial thing was we wanted to get, a couple names, and that's not the main reason, but the names that we got at the time were Edward Furlong and Dee Wallace. So we worked with them, and then there was kind of like rumblings that, maybe she might be interested. And throughout the initial, beginning of the production, it just wasn't feasible, to have her, to have her travel and stuff. So we kind of just, put it to the side for like a month, and then she said yes. And it was just about persistency, because all you could do is ask, and they could say no and say no. But I just felt in my gut like that she would take interest if she, understood like what we were kind of going for. So being able to share those clips with her and she can understand it better, I think that's what kind of made her say, okay, I want to do this, and being interested in working with Chico specifically. Chico, who played Rico, she has nothing but great things, great words to say about him and praise. So the process was just, kind of discussing the character. I remember the initial process was when I was directing through FaceTime. It was the first two times. Like I said, Steve and Scott had traveled to Texas to film with Shelley, and it was that one scene. The second time was also through FaceTime for me as well. I was able to actually meet her later on, but the process was where we'd have a conversation on the phone, and Chico or Steve would, because Chico was in the scene. It was very, small, intimate set. It was only a few people. They would hold the phone, and I would talk to Shelley, and we'd just kind of have a conversation about the script and everything. And then from there, we just kind of, discussed it. And then I would watch Scott Hansen's director of photography skills as he was filming it. And I would see the composition of the shot and say, oh, well, let's change it to this lens, or let's do this. And that was interesting for her because she said in interviews how it was just different. It's kind of like the future of filmmaking, she feels, because at the time my daughter was younger and I couldn't, leave New York to go to Texas and whatnot. So, but later on, as she grew older and stuff, I was able to, take the trek out there and work with Shelley finally.
That's such a good point that Shelley made that I didn't think of. The last time she was in film, the landscape of film was completely different.
You couldn't direct somebody on Zoom.
And the way everything is done, that's so interesting. What can you tell us about, like, seeing her? Obviously, you didn't just watch her act, you directed her, so that's a very intimate connection you had with her as an actor. What can you tell us about her process as an actor at this point in her career?
Yeah, well, she was it's like kind of a back and forth. She would ask questions and I'd kind of answer what I felt like what the character was. And the character is unlike anything she played. I think it was a little hard for her because of the type of character. She's used to like the nicer type of roles, and the mother in The Shining, who had to deal with a lot of the stress with Jack Torrance and trying to protect her son and stuff. So, and Fairy Tale Theater and Suburban Commando and Popeye and a lot of those films. I don't know if she's ever had a role like this, and it just shows you the professionalism of her and how she can just play any role. And I feel like her having that opportunity, I think like maybe there were people who kind of gave her that opportunity after she retired for whatever reason, but I felt like she still had some sort of acting left in the tank. And to end on something like that 2016 Dr. Phil thing was just, I didn't like that episode. I thought it was very expletive, and just trying to give her an opportunity to show the world that she has the ability left, because I feel like she has so much to give, and she's very sweet as well. So I loved working with her. She was very sweet.
We watched the film last night, and that's what I kept saying to her over and over again, is she is so good still. She was really amazing in the movie, and that's why I love that you gave her this opportunity, because like you mentioned the Dr. Phil thing, she is so clearly, even years beyond that, so much more than she was portrayed then. So I think, this movie really gave her, and like you said, I didn't even think of it in that way either, that she hasn't played a character like that I have seen her in, and she really was amazing in the movie.
Thank you, appreciate that. I'm glad that you guys had a chance to look at it, and I love conversation. I think filmmaking is like, it's so interesting, right? Because like films and any form of media or medium or whatever, when it comes to the creative aspect, there's so subjective. Some people like this type of film or that type of film, this type of film. Drawing inspiration from trying to do something original was something that I felt like very strong in, because there's so many. I looked at it like this. My investor Elliot, he put up most of the money, and he said basically it was basically like write what you want, do the film you want to do. And from there, I said, if this was my only opportunity is, having something funded, I don't want to copy what's been done already. There's so many, killer offing everyone one by one. That's fine. I'm sure I'll do that one day, but, it's for someone like this, I wanted to do something unique and something that was tailored around Chico, because Chico also, when I was talking to that producer initially in Michigan, he kind of nixed the idea of working with Chico, and I was distraught over that, because he, to me, is someone who is an actor that should be seen, because he's very, very talented. He started like in the in his country, he would act before he even knew what acting was. Like they would perform when he was, younger, and just, he's like in his early 60s. So when he was born and, in his country, him and his like cousins, and I don't know if it was brothers, sisters, but his relatives would like basically act until from the sun coming up to the sun going down, he'd be in the woods with his uncle, in the woods in the hills of I think it was Dominican Republic. So all these things he brings to that. So again, not knowing what acting was when he was younger, and then kind of just bringing it to the table with within what he's doing today, and all the lessons he learned and all the ups and downs he's been through, and being able to do that. I wrote it for him, so that's why I think he did pretty well with that character. Yeah.
Where did the story come from? How did you become involved in the film? And just tell us about the story and kind of what inspired it, and how you think that people are going to feel when the credits are rolling.
Yeah, so Chico Mendes, I've known the guy who played Rico for almost 20 years at this point, and I've worked with him on so many different projects. There was a producer in Michigan who we were talking about doing a film with the same title. I've always had that title from years ago when I did like a short film back in like 2006 or 2007. So I've always had that title, and we're supposed to shoot something in Michigan, but it fell apart because of just a lot of red flags that we were seeing, just a lot of red flags about the producer, and like there was a lot of yelling, and it was a very odd situation. And I said, you know what, I just want to kind of step away from this and just kind of start everything. So Scott Hansen from Digital Thunderdome, he said, well, why don't we do it in Atlanta? Come to Atlanta. And I said, well, why don't you come to New York? He's like, fine. So kind of the basis of the idea started with, Rico and some sort of cabin in the middle of the woods, and him waking up completely bloody and not knowing what happened. And then like him going to the cabin alone. The first 10 minutes was going to be like just him just alone sitting around, and like a werewolf sitting across from him. So those are like the original ideas, and then it kind of expanded from there. But I think mental health is very prevalent in the film, and the fact that, people, like certain characters in the film, for people who haven't seen it, take advantage of others and basically push them to a realm of going over the edge, and people are cruel and people are messed up. So I think, as what character, had done that to Rico and whatnot. And, and just that people suck a lot of the times, not all the time, but a lot of the times. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because to me, it was just like the werewolf and all of that, the gore, it really was just a visual and more literal representation of just how terrifying it is when you're in your mind, and your mind is at odds with you. And I think it was interesting the way you brought in all these like real monster type figures, because that is kind of how it feels. And that's such a good point too, the way that you can be vulnerable if your mind is not on your side.
Oh, for sure.
It's really an important thing to cover, and you did it so beautifully in the film. You brought up something that stood out to me, which is that you didn't want to, as a filmmaker, you didn't want to do something that somebody else had already done. And that's something I think about a lot, where it almost feels like it would have been easier for filmmakers, like even like 50 years ago, to make film, because it's almost like the more people create,
the more time passes, the more people do things.
So it's like last year, like when I went to see Megan in the theater, right? I'm like, oh, it's a creepy doll, like that's Chucky, right? But then it has to be, oh, well, she's AI based, and that's her deal. And I wondered, for you as a filmmaker, what do you make of? Yeah, there has to be something, right, to make it stand out, to make it new, or else it's just the same thing in a different way. What is your take on that as a filmmaker? Is that something you have to consciously sit there and think, what can I do in this scene that's not been done before? Like, how can I make sure I'm setting myself apart, my story's different? Is that something that's on the forefront of your mind when you're making films?
Definitely. I mean, the technical aspect too, like trying to, understanding like how the camera works, and the lenses, and how to tell a story through the visuals. So I'm very technical when it comes to directing. So I really like to focus on, those elements, and working directly with like someone like Scott Hansen, the director of photography. And tone is very important to me, because like if you think about tonality, people have been desensitized by horror so much to where you know, if you're like a real big horror fan and you're watching horror movies, like I've seen stuff on like Instagram from like the 80s, films I haven't even seen. There's one film like where this old lady got thrown to the wall. It was kind of like a schlocky type of 80s horror movie, whatever, but and then like the woman like rams, I think, her fist in the head, and then it's like all this green gunk comes out and stuff. And although it's not gory or anything, it's really cool. But there are, you know, we've been desensitized to seeing so much in films that, you know, I think tonality is important. Like Halloween, like John Carpenter's Halloween, there was a certain tone to that film, and that's what inspires me and draws me as a filmmaker, seeing those types of things, like George Romero's Day of the Dead, which was very like an isolated underground bunker type of film with zombies and the end of the world, and just how humans and science, like the military and the scientists, just can't, you know, come to terms with one another. And it's very prevalent even today in the political aspect of, you know, Democrats and Republicans and stuff. And just like, I think it's human nature, where as human beings, we all just, you know, we have this destruction to ourselves, you know. And I think when it comes to religion or politics, there is control to a certain degree that people can abuse, you know. So, and then like, you know, commentary on that kind of stuff and making some sort of commentary, whether it's social or political or whatever the case is for movies, I think is important. And there's also Marvel movies, and then there's also fantasy, and, you know, so there's everything. And I think, you know, it's just you know, just if you're going to make a movie, if you're a filmmaker or you want to be a filmmaker, you know, just make the movie that you want to make. And it takes time to learn to learn who you are, and your voice for movies when it comes to making movies. And as a creator, as a writer, as a person who, you know, everyone copies and we get ideas from things, and then we're also inspired by those. And there's no right or wrong, it's all subjective, you know. You know, I've learned that like early on in my career, when I was like in my early 20s, like I could take on the world, and this person's doing it wrong and that person's doing it wrong and I'm doing it right, you know. So but I'm in my early 40s, so as you grow older and you get humble and you start saying, okay, now I see the world from a different perspective. Whereas like in your 20s, you might not see it the same as you do if you're like in your 30s or your 40s or 50s and so on. There's so much you learn as you get older, for sure. So
Yeah, it's perspective.
I would imagine too that there's a struggle between what you envision, because you can envision anything in your mind. It's your mind. You can, you know, anything that's possible or really impossible you can think of. But then there's a certain point where like you need to translate that into a film that people can watch. You need to go on a set and bring that to life, whether it's in like CGI or actors or a set or something. So I would imagine like it's always that balance between like, this is the budget I have, this is the idea that I have, how do I bring this to life?
And that's
in
why
a faithful way.
That's why movies like this one are so good, because that's why, like you mentioned, people are desensitized to horror. Like I am so desensitized to horror to the point where it's like I want to be scared, but I never am. And then the second I read even the plot summary of this film, and it's like, oh, the cabin, he got a head injury, I was just like, yes, because that kind of thing is so much scarier.
Because I think the scariest horror films are things that are somewhat rooted in reality.
It's thrillers versus...
Yeah, and also, I mean, that could happen. So you can get head injuries, and then they're in a cabin in the woods.
Exactly.
You know, it's like, it's rooted in things that can really happen, and then you add all the Hollywood magic to it. I also like what you said about tone, because when I think about tone in horror movies, I always think of The Shining, because it is amazing how cozy that movie is in the beginning. Cailin and I saw it, like The Shining was playing at a local theater around Halloween last year, and we went and saw it for the first time in a long time. And it has such a cozy, and obviously Shelley's character, her warmness brings a lot about this, but it's so cozy.
Yeah.
And yet it's like I want to take a nap, like a relaxing nap while I watch it. And then next thing you know, you're just into horror. Which is kind of like your film too. I mean, it just had like that, you know, it started one way and then
goes from there.
It goes from there, yeah.
I could talk about The Shining all day, for sure. Yeah, I mean, there's something about that film that it's kind of similar. I'm not sure if you've seen Day of the Dead, but very similar in the tone of isolation. You know, like you have this feeling at first, it's like, okay, the snow's not there yet. Then all of a sudden, the storm, it's wintry, and they're entrapped in this, like, you know, in the Overlook Hotel and whatnot. And just, there's something about it, because there's also, I mean, I'm not sure, I don't know the name of the person who did like this, like the sound design, but like you hear the wind and you hear the rumbling, and so there's so many layers, and I think Kubrick understood that. And I mean, it's just perfect film. I mean, it really is, and it's a fun film too. I mean, no one. I don't think it's fun to see people try to get murdered, but we it's a cathartic, right? Like as viewers, as artists, to do things that people can't normally do. And like I know some filmmakers who like go crazy with the blood and go crazy with the gore and the splattering and stuff, and that's fun too. So it's like, people love that kind of stuff. And again, there's different elements of horror, right? Like there's different stages and tiers of horror as far as like, there's the not as bloody, then there's the bloody, then there's the crazy blood, then there's buckets of blood. So, all that kind of stuff. And I think I like that Kubrick did something very minimal, very similar to John Carpenter. And John Carpenter's Halloween, when his sister gets murdered, when she's like holding her like chest area and she's getting, and the, Deborah Hill's character is, playing the hand of young Michael Myers stabbing the sister. There's blood there. But then throughout most of the film, there's not really anything, if at all. There is some actually, I think, Laurie Strode gets, cut in the arm and falls down the stairs. There's some blood there, but it's the element of suspense that I think works so well with Carpenter and Kubrick. And I think Romero has some of that in some of his films too, so, but yeah, I think that, The Shining is one of the greats of all time. And I don't know if you've seen Eyes Wide Shut, but that's another one of my favorites. I love that film as well. It's really crazy.
Well, we're big Shining fans. I mean, we're twins. We dressed as the Shining twins.
Aren't they officially the Grady twins?
The Grady twins, yeah. And they're not even twins in real life.
Yeah, between the ages of like 10 through like
ever, yeah. Which is always the Shining twins. We have these costumes that we wear every year.
Spattered new blood on it every year.
Every year we just add some new blood, freshen it up.
You know what you were saying that was interesting too is like the idea, like we talked before, the idea of like doing the same thing that another filmmaker did. I was reading somebody the other day, somebody said something, it might have been an interview, and they were like, you don't have to worry about doing something that's already been done before because the story has never been told by you. Yeah. So inherently, the story is going to be different because you have a perspective. What do you think is your perspective as a filmmaker? Or does it depend on the project, maybe?
Like, what is a Scott movie?
Yeah.
Like Kubrick is like, I mean, I don't want to generalize now, but people say like, oh, I know when I see like a this filmmaker, like that's a Spielberg movie.
Yeah.
Like, what do you bring? Do you think to each film that you make?
Just I try to be as serious as possible. I take the craft very seriously, so whatever people get out of that, I guess they'll get out of it. I mean, I'm inspired by George Romero and his movies, so there's definitely layers of Carpenter, and like saying to my composer, hey, I want like a Carpenter score. I want like 80s synth. I want like a Prophet synth like John Harrison did in like Day of the Dead. So there's elements of that. So just very serious type of stuff, dark drama. So I don't know. I guess it depends too. Like this is my first like feature length horror. I've done so many horror shorts and drama shorts and thrillers and things like that. And I did a docudrama in 2018. So I guess it really depends. I just always take things extremely seriously when it comes to it because I feel like the horror industry, the horror industry has been so watered down. There was a long time of a lot of remakes, and obviously remakes have happened for decades. Long time. I love the Fly remake. Cronenberg's The Fly remake from the 80s, and that was a remake of the original Fly. I think it was the 50s, I think. But so there'll always be remakes, but there was a time where I was in like my early to mid 20s, like again like that kind of I could rule the world kind of stuff, or I think I can kind of thing, looking at all these like remakes like back in like the 2005, 2006, 2007, there were like a slew of remakes. 2003, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So there were so many remakes happening back then. And I said, I don't want to do something like that. Now, if I'm hired to do a remake and I really feel I could do a spin on something, I mean, look, everyone's a hypocrite to a degree. But, at that time, I was like, I was so strongly wanting to just say, let's do original stuff. Let's like bring back the elements of what we loved, and I think a lot of studios might have missed out on that because if a Michael Bay film, Michael Bay did Transformers, does like a Friday the 13th, like they did, some people like it, I didn't like it, but there's all different films out there. I know there's a Carrie remake, right? There was a whole bunch of Amityville remake, so there was all those remakes, and I looked at it at that time and said, I don't like this. Let's do something different. Like, why can't we make something original? because I'd met a filmmaker at that time, Chris Garitano, who did a film recently called Montauk Chronicles. He's doing some really cool stuff, original stuff as well right now. And I was in my, early to mid 20s, and he kind of planted a seed in my head and said, you made a zombie film, a short film, and you want to like show, I wanted to show it to George Romero because he's like the, godfather of zombie films. And he said, really think that George Romero wants to see like a zombie film? You know how many zombie films he gets at conventions? Do something different. So, it's not the same old thing. So he kind of planted that in my head. And ever since, I've been having that to a degree in my head, but also, kind of thinking for myself as well, because, you can kind of hear from people and you get influenced. But are you really thinking for yourself? So it takes maturity, it takes time, it takes all that. And then here we are at this point, making the movies that we feel that are our voice finally.